Good morning, everyone. Ben here, and today I'm recording this a little bit earlier, so I don't have enough data on the economic stuff yet, especially considering the quarter just ended. So I don't have consumer, confidence, a good inflation rate to look at, stuff like that, GDP growth, etc. So I'm leaving the economic factor on my model the same as it has been. For anybody who's curious, this is what the polls only would indicate. Democrats win Arizona. I'll go through just the swing states here. Colorado wouldn't really be considered a swing state. Florida would be going Democratic. So would Georgia. Go on down to Indiana would be competitive. Iowa wouldn't be at all. Democrats would win it. Kansas would be competitive. Louisiana would start looking like it would be competitive. Maine wouldn't even be competitive. Michigan and Minnesota would both be completely out of reach. Missouri would be competitive. Montana would be competitive. Nebraska would be very competitive. Nevada, not really. New Hampshire, definitely not. Go to North Carolina. Democrats would win that one. Ohio would be a very narrow loss for Republicans, which I find interesting. Pennsylvania would be pretty wide, but interesting that it's still under 10. South Carolina would be starting to get competitive. Go down to Texas. Democrats would win that one. Utah would be extremely competitive, which I find interesting. And you look at that, that'd be 5% win nationally for the Democrats, a little bit over that. So maybe it's overestimating Democrats if we're going polls only, which I think is reasonable to say. And of course, I'm standing by the incumbency advantage here, which is about a 6% swing, at least from what I've found going through each election since the 30s and taking out the outliers and, of course, FDR's two other elections, aka the one for his third term and the one for his fourth term. So I'm not updating this, though I may decrease the strength of the effect while still judging the economy the same. Not because I think it's having less of an effect, but because I may be overstating the effect of the economy. This is a 4-point swing right here. I think I may be overstating it, especially if we wind up getting to the election and it winds up making my forecast completely unusable because it's a 4-point swing as it stands. I may have it on a scale of, I may change this significantly. I had to play around a lot with it when I was making my election night for Trump versus Booker with a relatively good economy. And I was finding that this overstated an electoral advantage despite polling, the hypothetical polling showing that I created showing a close race with Trump having an advantage. This, I think, overstated the advantage, and I may change that in the next week or so when I find a good way to do that. So I want to go to this tab in just a second here to look at the latest polls, specifically this general election poll from Michigan. And I want to talk about how I think is the election forecasting community, myself, LT, Stellar Spark, I guess some of the other guys too, if I could remember the names with kind of generic, I'm going to call them generic names like so-and-so's election forecasting or political forecasting network, stuff like that. Very generic names I guess that makes sense, but it makes it hard to remember who's who. I think we need to, as kind of a community of forecasters here on YouTube, to keep better contact with each other, discuss methodology, and maybe even come up with a consensus map, because I think that might be good. And it might show whether or not we as a community are overrating Trump's chances, overrating the Democrats' chances, or seem right on the money. Anyway, so let's talk about this polling. I'm a little skeptical of this because of this poll, because this Emerson College poll shows in one of their two, including Schultz, who is pretty much going to take away support from any Democrat. It shows Biden support widening, at least according to their margin here. When you look at it and actually take the numbers, doesn't change. And so that I find skeptical. The one with Sanders shows Schultz taking away, and interestingly enough, Schultz is going to run. I honestly think he's going to run at this point. Especially considering who he is hiring. He's hiring former GOP and former Democratic campaign advisors, polling staff. You know, the types of things you do if you're going to announce. So this could get very interesting, and I'm going to have to figure out a way to include Schultz in my model. I'm probably just going to have him listed as other just to cover my bases, you know. But I may have to figure out a way to change some things up with that. But we look at this, and it generally shows that, except for the Minnesota Nice Amy Klobuchar, Trump does fairly well in Michigan, does very well against Kamala Harris, does very well against Elizabeth Warren, comparatively. Now, this is 2 points. This is 2 points. That's not only well within the margin of error. Heck, you could even argue that this is within the margin of error. I would, because that's it shouldn't be 53-48. I think they're rounding both up, but whatever. So let's assume this is a 4-point gap. That's within the margin of error if you assume, say, a 3% margin of error, even a 5% margin of error. Or not 5% margin of error. Even a 5-point gap is still within 3% margin of error. But what this indicates is that Trump does still maintain his support in the Rust Belt. And he's not too far off his numbers from 16. Meaning that he will probably mount a very good campaign in the Rust Belt. And that means that I have higher confidence now of my assertion that Trump's probably going to carry Iowa. He's probably going to carry Ohio, and Pennsylvania is at the very least a true toss-up where you can't really determine an advantage. Wisconsin, the same thing, but for the sake of not having true toss-ups on my map, I call Pennsylvania for Trump, I call Wisconsin for the Democrats, and my model backs up that Wisconsin is probably slightly more Democratic than Pennsylvania, which is kind of hilarious because for a long time I was considering Wisconsin to be the Democratic equivalent of Virginia for the Republicans. So Wisconsin is to the Democrats like Virginia is to the Republicans. A state that they once were very strong in, and then all of a sudden it just moved. I'm probably wrong on that now that I'm getting actual data and models, But it is interesting that Wisconsin isn't solid Democratic territory anymore. And the other thing I wanted to note about my model is I started to use to roll my average a little bit more as time goes on. So this will be week by week. So we've already got 2 weeks of March in. One was really just a weekend of March, but I'm counting it, so deal with it. So this is kind of a bit of an outlier in some regards because it doesn't have as much polling data as, say, the second week of March does. And I'll collapse this in next Monday, and then at the end of March I'll collapse that, and then average all the weeks together, and that'll be that, and that'll be the March one, and then actually I'm going to have to collapse it again into the first quarter of 2019 quarter one average. So anyway, I'm going to go here, and next Monday I'll see if the blue and red is being where they are is still popular, and I'll make my determination then whether or not to switch back to red for Republican, blue for Democrat, or stay blue for conservative, red for left-wing policies. Because I want to make sure that my international audience, which does actually exist, isn't completely left out and actually can remember the ideological differences between the parties. So, anyway, I want you all to take it easy. Have a nice day. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.